Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. My name is Nick.
I'm Ian.
Today we're going to talk about the band The Beatles. I've been a big Beatles fan for a long time. We're going to talk about where we think they would have gone musically had they stayed together. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you click on that link down below. Go check out the Vinyl Den Facebook group. I know I say it every episode, but it's a cool place to continue the music conversation. There's also a couple other links down there. There's one for the Vinyl Den merch page. We got the Vinyl Den t-shirts and sweatshirts on there. There's a link for the Vinyl Den Spotify and Apple Music playlists where every week we're just compiling music that we're talking about here on the channel, putting it together on a nice playlist for everyone to enjoy. And there's also a link for the Vinyl Den Patreon page. If you want to support the show, it's always greatly appreciated. You can support the show for as little as $1 a month. Of course, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me the old thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time we release new episodes. So I don't know about you, but I've been a really big Beatles fan really ever since I was a little kid. Probably, probably
always been
7,
around the
8, 9
music.
years old, yeah.
Yeah, even before that. I mean, it was always on the radio.
Yeah.
I know your parents listened to essentially kind of the same music that my parents listened to, at least as far as radio music went. Beatles were always on there.
Yeah.
It's probably some of the earliest music I can remember listening to.
Yeah. And the Beatles is really always kind of interesting, to me at least, that they were really only a band for a really short period of time and made some really incredible music that was really, 60 years later, still kind of is relevant and is still good music today, as good as it was 50, 60 years ago.
Right.
And, they're a band that, like I said, they over their career, though, they definitely evolved.
Yes.
And from the beginning, they did that like bubblegum pop kind of sound, threw some like psychedelic stuff in the late 60s. And then in the late 60s, they kind of moved into kind of a different rock kind of sound.
Right.
And I wonder if that sound, if they would have continued to kind of evolve into the 70s had they stayed together.
I suspect that a lot of it would have depended on what songs that they wrote for their first solo albums were written while they were still technically a band, because those may have been better with the union between Paul and John.
Yeah.
Maybe arguably they could have been worse too. It's hard to say.
That's very true.
But I think it ultimately would depend on that as terms of what we know came immediately after.
Yeah.
But going forward, knowing what each individual musician did, it would be difficult to say, but you can kind of think, as you pointed out earlier when we were talking off camera, they worked so well together. The unity of that group, the unity of the writing between John and Paul.
I think they're arguably the greatest songwriting duo in music history.
I would agree that's definitely a possibility. So if they had stayed together, we may have gotten similar music to what they released individually, but heightened.
Yeah.
Better.
Or like you said, that might have been even worse.
It could have been worse, Every artist tapers off at some point, and a duo is always going to have that friction, which may or may not make music better or worse.
I think the friction between John Lennon and Paul McCartney, I think is what the friction between them and the issues that they had between them, I think is what made them partially as good as they were.
Because they were friends forever. I mean, they know each other since they were kids, at least as I understood it.
Yeah.
So that friction was natural. It was like almost family natural. Mm-hmm. And I think that played a good part in, making what they did so good. What they did together, so good.
To be completely honest, as far as their solo careers go, I'm not a huge fan of a lot of their music. I think individually, there's one really good album from John Lennon, in my opinion, and then a couple of okay ones. I think George Harrison of the solo albums, I think George Harrison probably made the best of album out of any of them as far as like solo work goes. Mm-hmm. But I think it would have been interesting to see, if the band would have recorded Imagine, the album, what the input of Paul McCartney with George Harrison's guitar work on that album. Would we still look at it in that same light, or would it have been an even better album?
It's hard to say.
That's
personally,
I
think
I'd want.
Right. I think it might have actually even been a better album.
Yeah.
But that's taking into account. I know it's not Yoko Ono's fault that the band broke up, but she was actually, she was a contributing factor at some point.
Yeah. It was really John's heroin use, but
right. But if Yoko's not in the picture, Imagine doesn't get made anyway.
Yeah.
So if the Beatles had stayed together, it would be because Yoko wasn't in the picture or as much in the picture, because that may have contributed to his drug use as well. Who knows? But I think Yoko would have been a much smaller player, and that would have changed the dynamics of Imagine across the board anyway.
Probably. But I know that some of those tracks that were on the first couple of John Lennon solo albums, some of those tracks were stuff that he had been working on with the Beatles previously. Right. So,
and the same with George Harrison. All Things Must Pass was basically a bunch of songs that were rejected by the Beatles that he had written. A lot of it was. That's why it was a triple album. Wasn't it a triple album when it first came out?
I think it was double.
Double album. When it first came out, it was a double album. That's why, because it was all the rejected tracks from Beatles work.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think specifically with All Things Must Pass, I think it would have been a very different album with input from John Lennon and Paul McCartney.
But since a lot of those tracks were already disregarded or set aside, we'll say, by John and Paul, we may not have ever heard those, or maybe we may have heard them at a much later time and from a much different artist than what George Harrison was in 1970, 71. Yeah. So who's to say? All Things Must Pass might never have come out, or it may have come out and been different.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Different doesn't always equal better.
Right, exactly. Especially since, like I said, I agree with you 100% of the solo works. All Things Must Pass, especially that first handful of them. Yeah. All Things Must Pass is the best of them.
Because I think if you look at a band like the Rolling Stones and the kind of musical journey they went through from, say, 68 to the end of the 70s, they released some very different music over that period. I've always kind of wondered if the Beatles would have went down a similar path, or would they have kind of stuck to that early 70s sound that they had on their first couple of solo albums.
I think they would have experimented for sure. And maybe even more experimentation, because they would have been more comfortable to do so within a group dynamic.
Maybe, because they weren't really all that experimental on their own.
I mean, experimental in the sense that they were doing things that were different from what they were doing, but not necessarily experimental in the realm of rock music.
It's not like they were doing a Sgt. Pepper's or anything like that.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it was nothing they did was revolutionizing music or changing the paradigm at all.
Yeah.
They were doing new stuff for them, but not necessarily for rock music.
Yeah. Obviously, it's something we'll never know. We'll never know what the band could have done or might have done had they stayed together. Who knows? They might have never released another good album, after Let It Be. We just don't know. But
Let It Be might have even been different.
It may be.
Because, it was kind of rushed together.
Well, I don't know, because Abbey Road was the last album the band recorded together.
Right.
It wasn't released in order. It was released prior to Let It Be. But, I don't know. And Abbey Road's probably my favorite Beatles album. It's definitely up there. It's definitely one of my top 2 or 3 Beatles albums. But
maybe.
Yeah.
Top 3.
So who knows? They might have kind of continued on and done some really quality work, or they might have, done what they did in their solo careers and, just never really kind of hit that same magic again.
Right. You kind of look at it like, they always say, like, the bright flames burn bright and fast. The Beatles could be that, because, even take Michael Jackson. Thriller was one of the biggest albums of all time.
Yeah.
When Michael Jackson died, he was hardly, like, the biggest artist in the world. He was at one point.
He still was.
He was still big.
He wasn't the biggest artist in the U.S.
He was selling concerts. He wasn't selling records.
He was still selling records.
I don't know. Not to the same extent.
No. Obviously, you never have the same.
My point is that his output wasn't as glorified as that early output.
Yeah.
And the same with the Beatles.
Output.
Right. And that's true for any band out there. I don't care who you are. Very rarely is there a band that's 10 to 30 years on, putting out same level of quality as they were when they were in their 20s. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that new stuff is bad, because it's different. It's the point. So it might be a blessing that we didn't get that downfall of the Beatles. They ended on a high note, which I kind of think is what they wanted to do in the first place.
Yeah.
Because let's look at Paul McCartney's career. He's released some good albums. His 90s stuff is really good.
Yeah. And
some of his more recent stuff is really good. I don't like his 70s stuff so much.
Yeah, not so much.
But that's a perfect example. But he's selling out concerts because he's Paul McCartney, not because he's putting out mind-blowing music.
Yeah. That's
what's selling Paul McCartney tickets. And that's kind of what I was saying about Michael Jackson. It's not because of what he's putting out now. You're selling the tickets based solely on your name.
Yeah.
And if the Beatles got to that point, I don't know. I don't even think John Lennon would have even gone for it.
I think they would just stop.
He would have just stopped. I mean, we'd still maybe have those Paul McCartney shows, but arguably they probably would have stopped when George died.
Yeah.
If they had stayed together that whole time. So.
Well, that's all we got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop us a comment down below. Let us know what you guys think. Do you think the Beatles would have kind of continued on at that same kind of level? Or do you think they would have, like Ian, throughout there, might have gotten actually better or worse, It's kind of hard to say, because continuing on with that level that they had with those last 2 or 3 albums, I think would have been hard to kind of meet that with every album after that. But, like I said, it's something we'll never know. It's something we can always talk about, though. So let us know what you guys think. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give us the old thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all we got. Until next time.
Talk to y'all later.
Keep on spinning. Peace.